Last week, the best coding AI in the world stopped being American. It's called Kimi K3. It came out of a Beijing startup. It went straight to #1. And then, Moonshot did something nobody in San Francisco would do. They gave it away. Not a free tier, the actual weights. Published. Free. For anyone. A model that helped push the company to a $35 billion valuation. Handed out like a pamphlet. So why is China giving away a $35 billion AI for free? I'll show you exactly what that giveaway buys them. But first, the money. Because the money is what made all of it possible. Two of the biggest stories you heard this week were wrong, and I'll correct both. And there's one detail I haven't stopped thinking about. That one's last. Start with the money. It's the reason everything else this week happened. When you use one of these models through an API, you pay by the token. A token is just a chunk of text. That's the meter. And the meter is the whole fight. Kimi K3 bills $15 for 1 million tokens of output. Now guess what Claude Fable 5 charges for exactly the same thing? Not double, 50. And Fable 5 is the Model K3 just knocked off the top of the coding leaderboard. So the cheaper one is also the better one, which is a combination that isn't supposed to exist. That's not a discount. That's a different business. For a team running agents all day, that gap is the difference between a hobby and a line item. Every company that budgeted at last month's prices spent this week replanning. But the price was never the aggressive part. On July 26th, Moonshot published the weights, free, a day ahead of their own schedule. The largest open model anyone has ever released, downloadable by anyone with the hardware to run it. And be honest about that last part. This is not something you run on a laptop. But you don't need to own it to depend on it. You need it to exist, and you need it to be legal to build on. Think about what that means. Every other frontier lab treats the weights as the crown jewels. The weights are the company. Moonshot posted theirs. 2 hosting providers had it live the same day. So why would you do that? A supermarket sells bread below cost, not because bread is charity, but because bread gets you through the door. Open weights are the loss leader. You cannot be the standard if nobody can run you. And a model anyone can download becomes the default. Especially in countries that were never going to buy an American subscription at $50 a million. That's not generosity. That's distribution. So where were all those downloads meant to land? 9 days earlier, in Shanghai, China had already built the answer. We're halfway, so here's where we are. China cut the price, then gave the model away. And I said that buys them something. This is the something. On July 17th, Xi Jinping walked into the World AI Conference in Shanghai. Not a letter, not a video message. In person, for the first time ever. And he came with a list. 5,000 AI training places for developing countries. Cooperation centers with ASEAN, the African Union, the Arab League, Latin America, and BRICS. Then, 29 countries signed an agreement founding a new intergovernmental body headquartered in Shanghai. The UN Secretary General was in the room. The United States is not a member. So look at the shape of it. Free model, free training, free institution. That's a full stack, and it's pointed at everyone who was never in the room before. I'm still holding that last detail for the end, but none of this is cheap to run. So, who's paying? Moonshot closed a funding round on July 29th. Take a guess at what it valued them at. They closed a round bigger than the one they went out for. The valuation? $35 billion. And they're reportedly already talking to backers about one more round before going public, at $50 billion. A Hong Kong listing could land this year. So read that sequence back. Release the model, give away the weights, watch the valuation nearly double. Giving the product away made the company more valuable, not less. Because the thing being sold was never the model, it was the position. And that's the part Silicon Valley keeps missing. You cannot undercut someone who isn't charging. Now, if you've been watching this story in your feed all week, you've seen a very different headline. Something about lithography machines and America trembling. That story went enormous. It's also the one thing this week that most people got wrong. So, China built its own ASML. That was the headline. The biggest Spanish-language video on this all week pulled 94,000 views under the title, America Trembles. Here's what actually shipped. A Shanghai company began low-volume production of a domestic immersion lithography machine. Real milestone. Genuinely hard engineering. Now the numbers. 5 units this year. 20 next year. Some critical components still come from Japan. And the tool targets 28 nanometers, not 7. It's engineered so 7 is reachable later, using a technique called multi-patterning. But analysts put a commercially viable domestic tool at that tier the better part of a decade out. CNBC said the breakthrough comes with big caveats. Tech Times called it supply independence, not new nodes. And that's the real story, which is still a big one. Most chips in the world aren't cutting edge, they're the boring ones. In cars, in appliances, in power grids, and in weapons. That older tier is where the volume lives, and it's exactly the tier this machine serves. A country that can build its own tools for that stops being interruptible. So China is de-risking its supply chain. China is not leapfrogging ASML. One of those is happening now. The other is a decade away. And that wasn't the only mix-up this week. Correction number 1. You'll see Moonshot's valuation quoted at $16 billion in a lot of coverage. That number was real, but it's old. After the July 29th round, it's 35. If you're arguing about this in a group chat, you're arguing with a stale figure. Correction number 2. WAICO is being described as excluding the United States and Europe. It isn't. It's an open, intergovernmental organization with 29 founding members. The United States didn't join. Nobody locked the door. Washington walked past it. That distinction matters because one version is a wall and the other is a choice. And if you catch me getting something wrong, say so. That's how this segment keeps existing. So here's the detail I've been holding. Buried in Xi's list was a system called MAZU. It's an AI weather warning platform, and China is giving 30 countries access to it. Not a chatbot. Storm warnings. For places that were never going to build that themselves. Places that lose people every year to weather they didn't see coming. I genuinely don't know how to score that on a leaderboard. It might be the most useful thing announced all week, and it barely got covered, because it isn't a benchmark. Here's what I do know. The barrier moved. Frontier-grade AI is now free to download. So go build something with it. And here's my question. If you think giving away a frontier model is a mistake, what would actually change your mind? Tell me in the comments. Best answer, I read out loud next week.